And we are all here. Great. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for coming for this discussion panel to discuss everything that happened last week. Before jumping on to the technical question, I had the first question I wanted to ask to all of you because it's been the very first online only WWDC, so it was pretty different from what we are used to. So what are your thoughts about how it went? Daniel?
I thought the sessions were excellent. One of the things I really liked was if they only had 10 minutes worth of content, it only lasted 10 minutes. And so I really liked that. And because there were video, we could pause it, we could rerun it. The keynote wasn't really for us, but one of the things I liked was there wasn't all the time of bringing someone on stage or all that. It moved pretty quickly. And so day one was okay, but I thought the sessions were amazing.
Okay, yeah, indeed, the keynote itself was like 1.5 hours instead of the regular 2 hours because of clapping and people coming on and off.
It was more the State of the Union that I thought I could have seen more. We didn't see much about the tools. We didn't see much about the language. Saw very little code until an hour in. So the State of the Union for me really was disappointing, but the keynote was what you expected.
Okay, thank you. Antoine?
Totally agree with Daniel. But yeah, on top of that, I really liked the tour through Apple Park. I've never been there, so it was really awesome to go through it, like James Bond scenes. I think a few there. But yeah, it was different this year. I kind of missed the in-person events, but at the same time, it also felt like the community was more connected than ever. Everybody was online. There were several events as well as on Twitter sharing a lot of things. And I mean, if I look on the first responses, it feels like everybody really liked the format, having shorter sessions. So yeah, I wonder, beforehand I was like, I'm really going to miss the in-person event, but I wonder if next year is in person, if the sessions go back to the old format. Maybe I'm going to miss this way of doing the
yeah, maybe people will stay, will want to have this like this next year. We can see that.
Yeah. The only downside though is that you have to wait all day. I'm living in the Netherlands and we had to wait till like 7 p.m. the whole day basically gone, and then the sessions are there. But yeah.
But at the same time, it means that it's also beer time when you can watch the session.
That doesn't always help though.
So it seems like we have a couple of issues with Ish and Tim. Ish and Tim, do you hear us?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So it might be a small issue with the video itself, but if we can hear you, that's perfect. So Ish, what do you think about this first online only WWDC?
So I was really surprised at the quality of everything. It's interesting because there wasn't a plan initially, of course, to do a purely online event. And they actually made it, I think, the best WWDC that I've experienced, which was, that's a real turnaround to take an unfortunate situation and then make it incredibly memorable, especially Serenity's daily recaps. I started looking forward to those and was sad at the end of Friday when I realized, oh, that was the end of that. I thought they did one of the interesting things is I actually found the videos to be more personal than normal, even though not being there, because the camera had like a tight shot of and I can see like their eyes, they're looking into my eyes kind of, and that whole thing, kind of like Daniel said, also being like a shorter session. Like one of my favorite sessions is only 5 minutes, but it's packed full of goodness. It's at an excellent pace. I don't feel overwhelmed by it, but it's just exactly what I need, nothing more. So I thought overall they did an amazing job. And I'm torn because my favorite part, like WWDC week is like my favorite week of the year. It's like Christmas for me. I'm torn because I really enjoy the community bits of it and engaging with folks and talking to folks, but I don't know how it would go back to another format for content delivery. So I'm really torn on kind of what the future should hold.
Yeah, it feels a bit like if they will have to do kind of a mixed version, maybe more online and still have some in-person things, because we all missed, I think, the in-person aspect of the conference.
Some folks have suggested that. I can't imagine what that would be like, but I also could imagine what this was like. So I'm open to new things.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Tim, what do you think?
I think given the constraints that Apple had on them around distancing and time constraints and getting everyone around, they did a really, really fantastic job of putting on a really accessible conference. I think the feedback that everyone gave was that it's the most accessible conference ever because everyone's at the same point rather than only the select few who could get a lottery ticket. I really enjoyed the videos. Normally I don't really watch the videos during the week because I'm kind of busy or in labs or meeting people, but it was good fun to watch the videos. I agree with everything that people said about the length of them. It's really nice to have them as long as they need to be, rather than either really spaced out or really crammed in. And I especially loved all the little mascots or toys that people had. It really kind of brought a bit of personality to the videos and made it feel a bit more human. But yeah, I'm torn. Like, I think the format for the content delivery was fantastic. I really missed either being at AltConf and just wandering around, bumping into random people or people you haven't seen for a couple of years, or just sitting in the labs and bumping into engineers, or being able to kind of just go, which lab looks a bit empty, going to chat to the engineers, or just harassing the Xcode people because I've broken something again, rather than having to wait for a session this time. But I think given this circumstance, it was fantastic. And I struggle to see how it can go back completely to the way it was. I definitely think there's going to have to be at least some sort of fully online approach next year.
Okay, thank you. So now let's move on to the technical part of the discussion itself. And we'll start with you, Tim, and with one of the biggest announcements of this year, which is obviously the move from Intel to Apple Silicon. So how do you think, we haven't seen nothing hardware related yet, apart from the Mac Mini ARM that they are sending for the developer kit. So we don't know yet what the next Macs will look like or something like that. But we've seen already all the software implications with this different architecture. So how do you think it would go?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple of years. There's definitely going to be a bumpy transition period. I think for the majority of people, especially people outside the development community, it's probably not going to make any difference. Your general consumer is going to be quite happy with what they have. But it will be really interesting to see kind of the benefits that the silicon team can bring into Apple Silicon or ARM processors. Things like having kind of low power modes where it can spin up and stuff in the background that you can with iDevices, or having different cores, so have like high performance core and a efficiency core, and just seeing how they kind of work all that in, especially once the team are allowed to have the chains taken off, so to speak. So in a couple of years' time, when they kind of release the Mac Pro with the ARM chips, it'd be really interesting to see just how good it is. I'm certainly expecting big things, performance-wise and battery life-wise. I think there can be some really big jumps that just aren't possible. And it'll be good to kind of see, hopefully, more of a regular release of Mac hardware now that they're kind of not constrained from the Intel roadmap. So yeah, I mean, it was really good to see during the State of the Union that there was a good focus on developers for Apple Silicon. So they demoed doing things like Docker, running Xcode, doing the Adobe Creative Cloud stuff. They had a Linux environment. They also had a Vapor server, which was a nice little shout out to the community. And so they obviously have thought about the problems that people have, because a lot of developers outside of the Apple developer world want to make sure they can still build on the environments they're used to if they're building server apps or websites, etc. And they obviously have thought about that. And leading on to that as well, there could be kind of big ramifications for the PC world and server world outside the Mac world. The Mac tends to be a bit of a driver for change in the industry, whether that's removing CD drives or going to USB-C, sorry. So it could be really interesting to see how this affects both Windows and servers, because as more developers are on ARM computers, they want ARM servers to deploy to. And Amazon Web Services have released their Graviton chip, which is an ARM chip. That looks like it could be really, really powerful and also very cheap. And that could also change the PC world if Macs are coming out with all-day battery life, or you can put it in standby mode for 2 months or something, and it can still update itself, etc. Then there's going to be a demand on the Windows side to do that as well. So it's going to be an interesting few years, definitely.
Tim, can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, go for it.
So when Mac OS X released, Apple exposed the terminal, and all of a sudden a lot of developers were attracted to the platform. In the State of the Union, they showed us a lot of Linux demos and open source type of things. Do you think this is going to attract more people like that to the platform?
No, I don't think so. I think most developers are already on Mac OS because of you're basically running a Linux box. I mean, it's a Unix box, so for all intents and purposes, you get all the Linux commands you're used to. So I don't think there's going to be any more people coming over. But I think they were very clear to make sure that developers knew that all their tools that they still use will still work. And they also showed at the State of the Union that they're working with things like Docker and other languages and Homebrew and Mac ports to make sure that they will all still work on Apple Silicon when they're released. So things shouldn't break. I think that was a good thing to focus on for them.
Thank you. Do you think it will be also an issue regarding all the software transition?
Yeah, I think smaller developers or independent developers won't have any problems migrating. The biggest developers like Microsoft and Adobe have obviously already been roped in. I think it's going to be the kind of enterprise software and in between where things are slow to update. There was already a bit of a hiccup when 32-bit apps were dropped. That broke quite a few things because they haven't been updated. And so the same thing will happen again with the ARM stuff. But it looks like that they've thought about that, and there's Rosetta 2, which will emulate all of that. So things should mostly work. I'm sure there will definitely be some problems, but for the most part, it shouldn't be too bad for the general consumer.
Okay, great. Do you want to add something on the Apple Silicon topic, Antoine or Ish?
So there's one thing I found interesting is that they showed running apps directly on Big Sur. And that brings an interesting discussion, like, or at least a thought, like, will apps move to the new Big Sur, kind of like App Silicon? Because we also have Catalyst, right? Like how will those work together? So yeah, I just really wonder. I can see it working for games which might not need directly optimization for the UI, while I think that apps would really need to optimize for the platform because macOS is definitely a different platform. So I mean, Apple really showed that Catalyst is the future, kind of by just showing the improvements they did this year. So yeah, I just wonder. They showed it off, but I wonder what kind of the direction is for that feature.
Yeah, I understood, but is Catalyst going to enable apps developed for the new Apple Silicon to work on older machines? Is it going to be their backwards story for a while?
It's just a transition, kind of, is what you mean.
That's what I'm wondering. Because it brings us to take apps from one platform to another. Is that what's going to enable things that people develop for ARM to still, Apple Silicon to still work on Intel boxes?
Yeah. I mean, it could definitely be, but then it's still, it's quite interesting to see them developing Catalyst while it's only a transition period. It's a bit unclear for me too. Yeah.
That was something I wanted to bring up. So I watched a talk with Craig Federighi and John Gruber, in which Craig said that for the Apple Silicon Macs, basically all iOS apps and iPadOS apps be available by default on that system in that store, and then you would have to opt out if you didn't want them, which in a way is good, but also means that you really need to think about where your product is and make sure that it at least has a really good iPad design so that it's easier to move and transition onto the Mac, because otherwise you're just going to get what you get. So I think that'll be an interesting thing, and actually probably lead to more thoughtful iPad designs, because if the app's going to just end up on the Mac by default, you probably want to take a look at it and make sure that it makes sense.
that's going to take the money out of Mac apps?
I worry about that. I think that basically the paid upfront model has been dying for a while. I think that basically most things are going to move to subscription. I think they've already done that on the desktop as well, and to a large degree. If you look at like large platforms like Adobe, Microsoft, etc., large suites have already like transitioned to a subscription model. And with a subscription model, it won't hurt. What will actually happen is it's likely that the price of apps will actually go up because you'll be paying for the development cost of the larger one, the Mac, and then you have like a mobile experience that's convenient, but ultimately what will be justified is that you're paying the price for the full app, which would be the Mac or iPad experience.
Okay, so we'll move on to our second topic, which was kind of the second most anticipated and important topic this year as well. It's about, obviously, SwiftUI. And so Ish, I have a simple question for you. Is SwiftUI ready?
Well, that's complicated. It depends on what you want to do. There are for sure some things that I was looking forward to for SwiftUI that are missing. There's some things I didn't ask for that we got, which is nice. For example, the date formatting, inline date formatting, is like really cool and simple in SwiftUI. There's some things that are missing though, like image pickers, which would be great. What they did give us, we had some things before. SwiftUI, you could use it, but you need to use a lot of UIKit with it. Now we have, you can basically just make a SwiftUI app, so you don't need UIKit involved at all. You can just start off with SwiftUI, which is excellent. We have the most popular parts of collection views. We don't have all of collection view, but we have basically flow layout in collection views, which is great. We didn't have that before. We have the ability to scroll to a particular section in a scroll view. That's awesome. So we're basically able to do things with like state restoration, stuff like that. We also have the text view, which was my biggest ask, because a lot of the apps I write are like productivity related, and you kind of need multiple rows of text. You can't just have like the one line in a text field. It really doesn't make sense. And now we have a text view, so that's awesome. And then we have kind of paired views for things like video players and MapKit and things like that. So you absolutely can start off and make a Swift UI app. For some people, depending on their app, they can make it all in SwiftUI with no compromises and everything is fine. But there are still some edge cases. For example, if you wanted to have an app that had a photo picker, and instead of having a normal collection view, your view had like a circular view, or they put the cells were arranged in like a sine wave sort of thing. The best way to do that is still going to be using some UIKit to kind of blend things in. But overall, I would say that SwiftUI is it's in a state where we can do SwiftUI first and then add UIKit as needed.
Okay. Daniel, regarding SwiftUI, did we get what we wanted, and what do you see as its future?
So, I mean, all of what Ish said, obviously. What changed for me in a big way was my understanding of it. I thought that what we got last year was SwiftUI, which is currently implemented in UIKit or AppKit or whatever platform we're on. And I thought this year we got more of a clear view of, at least for now, SwiftUI is a DSL. And it's the language that we write in, but it's sort of a higher level thing. But we're very dependent on what UIKit has that enables all that. And so that's good news. We saw improvements to UIKit things as well that will benefit us in SwiftUI. And so I think my understanding of SwiftUI changed. It's the world we're going to live in, but we have to be aware that it's a layer above, and we aren't talking native yet. I don't know if that changes once we have Apple Silicon, whether they'll rewrite some of the OS or some of the APIs to dig directly to it. Some of the data session clarified some things in ways that I didn't understand it from the sessions last year. The fact that the view is drawn and then all these things just go away, that nothing is sort of sticking around, was not something I think I understood last year. And so my understanding of the life cycle of SwiftUI has changed a lot, and that's been helpful. So I like where they're going. I was very bothered at the beginning of the week during the State of the Union when they said, we're not breaking anything, when Josh said, we're not breaking anything. And I had two takeaways. First was Josh's title, I thought, told us a lot. Josh's title is he's in charge of Swift frameworks. And so that said that SwiftUI is one, that SwiftUI is going to be the way of the future. But not breaking bothered me because it meant, I don't know if you all remember the pain of coming to Swift, but when things broke, it was painful. And I sort of wanted to get that over now. And then I stopped and I thought about that more. If Apple wants people to come now to SwiftUI, then people that have to support back to iOS 13 don't want to say, oh, but it's going to break next year for iOS 14. So not breaking was the message for both SwiftUI and Combine. I think those were important messages to get people to come now.
Sure.
Because this is obviously one of the main concerns and for Apple, the fact that we are almost to iOS 14 means that all the companies, all the apps and developers that are supporting backward compatibility one version, they will be able to drop iOS 12 in the coming months. And so there is nothing left that stop them for using SwiftUI anymore.
I think that Apple was very surprised that people came to Swift so quickly. And they learned their lesson, and now they want people to come to SwiftUI quickly.
So now it's up to us to forget about UIKit and learn about SwiftUI.
I think especially some things like that. Now you can add SwiftUI elements to like libraries. It's almost like code snippets, but it's like a visual library. You can just kind of like drag and drop into your code. That's amazing. That's really, really cool. And also the fact that you can do SwiftUI as a way of doing like prototyping for like packages without actually including the SwiftUI like visual portion in the part that you ship, but you can have like a separate part that just kind of gives you like a visual way of kind of like looking at your code, kind of the way it renders and such. It's really, really cool. Like a lot of the preview stuff where you can run a preview on a device and then detach the device from the machine and still run the preview is just, it's mind-blowingly good.
And I think a lot of the goodness is the improvements to the Swift package manager. I mean, there's a lot that we're going to be able to include like that. And I don't know what Apple Archive is going to mean in the future, but that seemed a little promising as well. So they've got all these pieces that I think are going to come together in interesting ways in the future.
We will come back on more details about the SPM at the end of on the panel itself. Is there something you want to add regarding SwiftUI? Maybe Tim on SwiftUI on the server?
Yeah, so I'm a back-end guy, so SwiftUI is not really for me. Although I have to say, it is one of the things, very few things that has like pushed me to try and get back into iOS development a bit as well. Because I used to hate writing UI kit stuff because writing it safely and being able to test it properly is really difficult in Swift, at least. So having like a proper UI system designed for Swift has been really nice to at least play around with. SwiftUI for web, there's a couple of kind of community packages. I highly doubt we'll ever see anything official from Apple released, in my opinion.
Okay. Antoine, did you want to add something about SwiftUI?
Well, I'm mostly always really focused on what's new in Xcode and those kind of stuff, which we will discuss later as well. Yeah. But I was really happy to see that you can run SwiftUI previews on a device. Those kind of things just like make my process when working on a design much smoother and nicer. At least when I'm in the office with designers next to me, which is not really the case right now. But yeah, normally I could easily jump to a different desk and show what I've been working on. And I think that, I mean, feature for us developers with SwiftUI, I think it's simply amazing to think about what we can develop in the future with SwiftUI. At least, as you said, dropping iOS 12. You made it sound really easy, but I'm pretty sure it's a pretty tough decision for many of us. Sure. But yeah, I mean, once we can jump on the SwiftUI boat completely with our company products, I think we have a really good life.
Great. I think also it might be a kind of a good opportunity also for junior developers to jump on the boat and to become iOS developers, because it's easier to write, it's easier to understand, and they don't have to try to forget about UI kit as we are all struggling with. So I'm really happy and eager to see how it goes for also the younger developers.
But that's an interesting topic, right? Like, what does this mean for designers, for example? They're quite experienced in prototyping already. It gets easier to write your prototypes directly in SwiftUI, and maybe that brings designers and developers closer together. I can imagine a Sketch coming up with a plugin which is more optimized to export to SwiftUI code directly. There's even already products out there doing that in a simplified way. But yeah, I mean, hopefully it's not the future, because it could also take away our job as a developer, but, or we'll become designers. But yeah, it's an interesting thought to think about how that will look in the future as well.
One thing.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I found really interesting actually this year was the fact that the new control center in Big Sur is written in SwiftUI, and widgets on iOS have to be SwiftUI. Like, there's no other option. So there's clearly a path from Apple. They're both pushing it internally and making sure that developers use it and get hands-on experience with it.
And watch complications as well.
And watch complications, yeah.
And Apple is also, yeah.
At one moment, there's one more thing where iPadOS and macOS were merged together. Once I saw that control center, I was like, okay, it's gonna happen.
It's happening. It's happening. But yes, Apple is pushing really hard towards SwiftUI, because Apple has also different kinds of training programs, such as the Apple Foundation program or the Apple Developer Academy. And those have started already to be taught in SwiftUI yet. So they are really willing for us to work with it now. So we'll stay on the UI topic, but this time we'll move back to the old UI kit. And we've heard that Antoine, that the UI table view seems like it likely to be deprecated soon. So is it the end of the almighty UI table view?
Yeah, I already dropped on Twitter that it was rest in peace for UI table view. It might be a bit too early. It's obviously only supported from iOS 14 and up, and I think, well, it's hard to tell, but maybe 90% of the apps nowadays include a UI table view. It's been there since iOS 2, if I remember correctly, so it's in the real base of all our apps. But yeah, if you watch the session about lists in UI collection view, it seems to be really easy to mimic the same styling as a UI table view with all the elements we need: swipeable cells, headers, grouped cells. Yeah, I mean, they showed an example of a UI table view. At least I thought it was a UI table view, but it turned out to be a UI collection view with a custom flow layout. Or, well, it's not a custom flow layout because it's now natively supported. Either way, long story short, it really seems to me that the UI collection view is the future for iOS apps. And then we still have like a lot of apps to rewrite towards a UI collection view. But yeah, I'm surprised they didn't add the deprecation warning for this year already, because it seems to be already possible to do the same thing with the UI collection view starting from iOS 14.
Ish, you wrote a blog post like 3 or 4 years ago about deprecating UI table view. So
I did.
What do you think?
And the day has come. So I wrote that post even before this happened, but a few years ago, Apple deprecated begin end updates on table view. And I was thinking, okay, so how is this going to work with core data and such? But core data was modified last year to work with differentiable data sources. And I think since that moment, there really hasn't been a need to use table views, because collection views are plenty powerful. And there's even last year that a table view could do that a collection view couldn't do with a little tweaking. So I think that table view served us well, so I don't want to be disrespectful to it, but I look forward to the future, because I thought the table view, and particularly table view controller, was a horrible way to teach new developers how to write code. And I actually I wrote that blog post, I fault the UI table view controller for leading to the massive view controller kind of thing that eventually happened, because that view controller does all the bad things and puts everything into like one single view controller, and pulling it apart is really difficult to do. And now we have like true separation of concerns, which is great. My personal thought is go SwiftUI first. If you need a simple table, like a list of items, just do it in SwiftUI, because it'll take you, once you get good with SwiftUI, under a minute, you're just like done, right? And then if you need something more complex, transition to the collection view. No need for table views.
Yes. Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, so that's it for the UI part of the announcements.
Can I ask you a question of Ish?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Do you have a feeling, I mean, you mentioned the SwiftUI stuff at the end. Do you have a feeling when we should reach for lazy and when we shouldn't yet in SwiftUI?
Yeah, so basically, if you're going to have to do view recycling, like a large amount of view recycling, then that would be lazy. Because lazy is basically for things that are off screen. So if you're close, you're going to have like maybe 2 or 3 cells off screen. Perhaps not worth it, but anytime you're going to have to like scroll screen for the content, that's lazy.
Do you think people will do lazy by default, just to be sure for any being future proof or stuff?
Apple said don't do it. I don't know that they will listen, but it's easier to type without lazy, so maybe. I don't know.
Pretty explicit. Like when they introduced lazy, my question was, why would we ever not? And it sounds like it's more expensive if you don't need it.
Right.
Maybe we should make it smart that it decides on its own. Like if we bring in more than 10 elements,
just
it should
stop it.
The easy thing anyway is that moving from the lazy one to the regular one is just adding the word lazy or removing the word lazy.
It's super lazy to do. You just have to prepend lazy and now we're done. Yeah. So.
Okay, any more words about UI related questions? No? So we'll move on then to Combine. This was one of the big announcements of last year, and hopefully everybody was eager to see what was going to happen this year with Combine. So Daniel, what should we take away from what was and what wasn't done with Combine?
So my biggest disappointment was there wasn't a session on it. Even though there's very little new, I think a lot of people don't understand it yet and don't understand proper usage. And most of Apple's demo code last year was in a single class or a single struct. And so, you know, a lot of the power of Combine comes from there's a publisher over here, there's a view model or something in between, and you're relaying. And this year, the one method that we got that's really powerful that helps with that is we can assign to publisher. And so if you're in an intermediate thing where you're processing information you're getting in from somewhere else, it's very easy to assign it to a property that is itself a publisher. And so that's a huge additional method that we got this year. But more to clarify, because a lot of people are programming Combine like it's just React. And a lot of the philosophy is very different. And so I just wanted Apple to put more of a stake in the ground. Again, the not adding a lot of things or changing Combine or breaking Combine is part of this iOS 13 story, so people can come to it now. And some of the React people are complaining that there are things missing, and sure there are. I would have liked to seen a little bit more, but I'm really happy with Combine. And I'm doing everything in my power not to write a book on it, but I think I'm going to lose that battle.
That would be great. Because it seemed also like RX Swift was kind of a really hot topic like 2-3 years ago, and we heard less and less about it, and Combine arrived, which is kind of a good replacement because you don't have to have all this big dependency that you have to manage alongside your project. But still, will it take some time for people to adapt it, to use it?
Well, I never bid on the React bug, but Combine also, even though it wasn't designed to, and it initially you could see the differences, it really works well as a mindset with SwiftUI. And once you get them both in your head and start using new design patterns, all of a sudden your code just makes sense in a different way. It's not that it was bad in the past, it was just a different way of thinking of it. and I really like how they work together.
Yeah. So SwiftUI is a bit a way to show how it can work, and people will start using it without even knowing it at some point.
Sure, the observable and the state object, these things are just buying in, and the at published, you know, when SwiftUI and Combine first shipped, we had to create explicit publishers and use the did set and then the will set. At published made things so much more natural, and so people are using Combine and not even thinking that they're using Combine.
Yeah, that's it. Anyone else want to add something about Combine?
Yeah, I was a little disappointed that more things internal to Apple didn't switch from notifications to Combine. Like some of the keyboard stuff, I thought would have been really great to just have like Combine publishers instead of notifications. Especially since last year, when it took me a while to actually understand Combine, because a lot of the code, a lot of sample code Apple had was basically just notifications. They kept changing notifications and using publishers for those. And there's so much more to Combine, so much more you can do. I really thought that was kind of a nod that this year they were actually going to move away from notifications because it's a perfect use of Combine. We didn't get that, which is okay, but like Daniel said, I'm happy with Combine actually where it is. It's really powerful.
I think that concludes it as well a bit, right? Like on one hand, we kind of like to see new features being released for Combine, but on the other hand, it already does a lot of things in a really nice way. So maybe that's reason enough for Apple to say this year, like the foundation is good enough, and let's focus on other things this year, and maybe next year we get more improvements in Combine.
And also seeing it tied to not only notifications, but URL session was big, JSON parsing was big, and core data. And so the ties to those things were a step. And I agree with Ish. I really expected to see a lot more ties to the other, because they said this is going to be their solution for asynchronous notifications instead of delegates and callbacks. And so I did expect to see more of that. And I'm a little disappointed because one of the advantages Combine has over React is all these native connections. And so I did expect to see more, but perhaps we will.
Great. We will now move on to our next topic. So Tim, you are our server-side Swift specialist. And so I have a question for you. What have we learned and what can we expect for Swift on other platforms?
Yes, so just before DubDub, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago when Swift 5.2.4 came out, Apple put a blog post up, or 2 blog posts up actually. One was announcing support for other Linux distributions, so that's things like CentOS and other versions of Ubuntu, and then also Amazon Linux as well. And then related to that, there was a officially sanctioned AWS Lambda runtime for Swift. So this allows you to write small little functions that you can deploy, things like CloudKit functions, written in Swift and deploy them on AWS without having to hack anything together. So it was really, really cool to see that. And they had a session on Friday talking about AWS Lambda. So it was really, as a server-side Swift guy, it was awesome to see some sort of focus on the server at DubDub, which there hasn't been for a number of years. So it's exciting to see that push to other platforms. Windows is coming in Swift 5.3. And so it's kind of really opening up Swift to any developer that needs it. So if a developer wants to write in Windows or in Linux or in Mac or Raspberry Pis, they can. So that's really cool to see.
Are we going to see Apple Silicon Xserves come back?
I doubt it. It would be nice, but they're probably too expensive with the Apple tax. But I think with they have a lot of engineering focus on the server with the Swift Neo team. There's the Swift Crypto project and a number of other things that will kind of really show their intent. And also the core team now has also got Salim, who basically pulled Swift onto Windows single-handedly. Almost all the work was his, and Tom Duran as well, who's the kind of one of his many hats is managing the Swift Neo team. So there's a focus on the Swift core team on other platforms, which should hopefully break it away from that focus on just iOS or just macOS projects. Dog agrees too.
Yeah, concurrency is also a big topic.
Sorry, what was a big topic? Concurrency, yes.
Concurrency.
One day we'll get a concurrency model in Swift. So like first-class server languages like Go and Rust and other like JavaScript, even they've all got established concurrency models. So if you're writing asynchronous code, it's easy to write. Whereas Swift doesn't really have that. So Combine kind of brings some of that across. Swift Neo's got their own kind of concurrency concepts with futures and event loop futures and promises, but there's no first-party language focus, which is kind of really is holding stuff back, which is a pity. And the dog's annoyed as well.
Is there a concrete proposal?
You trained him.
Chris wrote his sort of manifest for the async await version, but is there a current idea of what direction they're going to take?
It's almost legendary, that proposal.
Yeah. There isn't a kind of any kind of a clear way forward. There's been quite a lot of discussion recently on the forums about it. People discussing whether coroutines are the best way or whether some other model and what async await actually means and what it looks like and some of the specifics. It looks like there are the low-level stuff going in, things like what memory page does a variable belong to. That kind of really low-level stuff that you need before you can start building the high-level concepts. Some of that stuff's starting to come to Swift, and the Swift 6 roadmap concurrency was mentioned on there. So we will get it in Swift 6, even if Swift 6 comes in 2025. So I think there's definitely a need for it, and there's a recognized need for it as well. I just hope it comes soon.
I just opened an Xcode project after I got Xcode 12, and I just started async await. I really just hoped that it that it worked, but it's interesting that it's that proposal is there for quite a while already, and I think I waited for it last year already, and I mean, yeah, it's hard to tell when they really want to come with it.
Antoine, we know it's almost Christmas time, WWDC for iOS developers, but
I didn't get enough. No.
I think, yeah, it's a very, very hard thing to implement correctly. And so I definitely rather they took their time and made sure it's done properly rather than rushing it and getting in a half-baked thing that didn't really work or didn't fit all the use cases.
Do you think they already have like a working example, or do you think they're already working on something internally?
Honestly, I think the Swift team have been very good at doing most of the stuff in the open. There could well be a branch of Swift or the compiler that brings in the necessary stuff to make async await possible, or even have those keywords. And of course, when the proposal finally hits, there has to be an implementation now as well. So there may be some kind of rough drafts, but I suspect a lot of it will go on the forums first to kind of scope out, because it is a big, big change to the language.
Okay, so we will keep on talking about the language itself. Daniel, where are we with Swift, and what do we still need?
Async await, obviously. We've gotten a lot of power from these sort of cheats like property wrappers, but the one that I'm really waiting for that I'd like to see land is function builders. And they've been doing a lot of work on the generics to make that possible. The stuff that Doug's been putting in, some of the stuff shipped with 5.3 to make, conditionals and things like that possible inside of these closures. But function builders, I think, is going to change the way we think about writing it. And I think it's going to make teaching coding easier, because the syntax, a lot of the goop will just go away, and teaching kids and being able to read our own code will become much more easy. So function builders is to me one of the big items.
I'm not familiar with function builders. Can you tell us
function
more
builders?
About what
it's
they
what
are?
Enables us, if you've written Swift UI, to say vstack curly brace and then put everything that goes in the vstack there. It's taking that trailing closure and putting it at the end. And you can do it now. They've given you that, but because what happened last year during WWDC was Apple released a bunch of proposals that they hadn't told people about. In the community just freaked out over the function builder one and said, yeah, this isn't what we want. And Apple's answer was, okay, but the stuff that impacts Swift UI, we need to use it. So this isn't actually part of the private. And then they're working on it's sort of inits working together with these build functions. And so you can look at the mechanism now and you can write your own, but the actual syntax of it might change when the thing lands. And they're doing work on it, and every once in a while there'll be a post on it to say where they are with it. But it's going to make your code, like Swift UI, very easy to read and to work with.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the Swift language itself, still, Ish, do you have some ideas about what is going to happen and what is missing or something like that?
That's an area that I actually don't know that much about. I'm pretty happy with the way things are in Swift so far. Nothing is broken in a really long time. And once Combine was released, I've been happy. So function builders look interesting, but currently I'm good.
That's nice to hear. So we move on now to more like tools related questions. And even, obviously the number one tool we are using while writing Swift is Xcode. Antoine, what do you think about Xcode 12?
I said it before, it's one of the first things I do once we're able to download Xcode 12. I just open it and I browse everything. So I'm looking into new features, new details, like what's new in Xcode 12, what will make our lives easier as a developer. I'm quite a productivity guru, so I'm always looking for ways to be more optimized and work faster, kind of. And this year there was no dedicated session what's new in Xcode. We got a few things in the State of the Union where they showed us. I think the redesigned organizer was there, and the new tabs functionality. But I wasn't really happy with those features. Kind of like they're nice, but I mean it doesn't really bring us really cool new things. But if you jump in, and I wrote a list right in front of me, and it covers like 10 or 12 points, which I really liked, which I think were more awesome than the points they showed us in the State of the Union. I just wondered why there wasn't a what's new in Xcode 12, because there are a lot of things they still deployed and implemented. So yeah, I don't know. I'm really happy with Xcode 12. I think, for example, the auto-completion times faster. Those are just the things that you expect to work like that, and now they do, which is really great. But there's also like small things. We have development assets. You can use a launch screen from an image. Obviously, the guard statement indentation, I think that got quite some traction on Twitter. People really like that. And I mean, yeah, what I said, I got a pretty big list, which I will probably show in a blog post later on instead of tiring you off with that whole list and summing it all up. But yeah, I'm just surprised that they didn't really show a dedicated session, because they did show some love for Xcode 12, but they didn't show it off in a session.
Also, there seem to be a lot of integration improvements to Playground, so they seem to be taking that serious with Xcode. The thing that I questioned was, in a lot of the Swift UI demos, they showed people dragging and dropping into code. And I thought that was for some new developers, it's very dangerous, because if you drop things in the wrong place, it's very hard to debug and figure out what you've done wrong. So I don't know I know it looks great in a demo, but I worry about that in practice.
Yeah, maybe they want to show it like it might look simpler than writing it yourself. Maybe it's just the impression they want to give.
Yeah, I think also they showed that last year, only it didn't work very well. So I think it was important to kind of to show it again now that it's working. It works so much better in 12 than it did 11.
Yeah, you know, it's like a funny thing to just discover. There's really gold mine if you look deeper into what's new in Xcode 12. I saw one tweet, for example, where they showed documentation from Xcode 11 next to Xcode 12, and the Xcode 12 version is so much more richer. You saw images in there, and like the whole documentation was kind of filled, where the Xcode 11 version was, well, mostly empty. I mean, yeah, there's a ton of great features.
I felt that though. I thought we were missing the Xcode what's new stuff, and I don't think we got a lot of the what's new in Swift. So Swift has improved an awful lot, and we got that one session, but I kind of missed the Ben Doug type of session where they talked in depth about what these things mean and how we think about them. And so Xcode 11 was such a huge improvement over Xcode 10 that maybe they just didn't feel it deserved the love this year. But you're right, they both improved a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, this is only Xcode 12. They did a lot in the simulator as well. They did a dedicated session, by the way, for the simulator, which was interesting. We no longer have to open the terminal and do some kind of use the default stuff to enable single touches to show up on those kind of things. I mean, yeah, that's cool to see as well. A preferences screen in a simulator.
I love some of the sessions about things we never think about, like the unsafe pointers and the numerics package and how type inference works. There were these just little tiny sessions that were just so wonderful to have this year.
Has anyone else tried the Xcode 12 yet?
I've been using Xcode 12 pretty much every day. I really like the new icon because I really want Xcode on the iPad. People don't want it, but I really, really do, and it gives me, I don't know, some hope of that. It seems just more stable, honestly. The code completion's faster. Things just work better. It's polished. I did not notice a ton of new features. Just basically the ones from the session videos. But overall, it's been a better and more solid experience. So I'll take it.
Great. So talking about tools. Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
The one thing I'm going to mention that wasn't a session video is the store kit testing in Xcode. Okay. That I was basically crying happy tears. That alone. Wow, that may be the highlight of the entire. I've lost so much money from StoreKit not working, because before now there really wasn't a way to test it. There was a sandbox, but it could work in the sandbox and then not work on the store, and the testing was just like incredibly bad, just so bad. So I was really happy to have a way that we can do tests now, especially since subscriptions are going to support family sharing now, and being able to support that without being able to test it would be a complete and total nightmare. So happy to have that.
And Ish, what did you like more, StoreKit testing or the fact that your Bluetooth headphone is not taking over your simulator sound?
Honestly, StoreKit, because the Bluetooth was annoying but didn't cost me tons of money.
Yeah, okay, good enough.
So it improved for the testing you just said. The testing also of we were talking about subscription just before. The testing of in-app purchases has improved a lot as well. So have you heard about it?
Yeah, so that's basically the bit I was talking about. In StoreKit testing, there's a whole like simulator that you can have for in-app purchases, where you can see the in-app purchase come in, you can invalidate the in-app purchase, you can see what it's like when it fails, you can delete them. You don't have to make a bunch of like random sandbox accounts and have pop up on your screen. Repeat, like the entire process is just the way it should have always been. So I was really happy to have a focus on that. Yeah, it's huge. Okay, so we will keep on talking about tools. The next one I would like to talk with your team is the Swift Package Manager. As it evolved, what do you think about what was announced regarding SPM this year?
Yes, so the two big things for Swift Package Manager this year were binary dependencies and package resources. So you can actually now use it properly, basically. And I think this will be a real inflection point for Swift Package Manager, because almost every package now can support Swift Package Manager. And I think most developers will start demanding that their packages that they use support Swift Package Manager. So even if you're using things like Firebase, where it's a binary dependency because they want to keep this stuff closed source, they can now add support for Swift Package Manager. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to CocoaPods and Carthage. But I honestly think that this is the beginning of the end of the beginning of the end for them. So it'll be interesting to see, but it's really good to see that they've finally actually added support for that. It's not to say that everything's perfect. There's still a lot of things that need to be improved. Package metadata doesn't really exist. Package discovery is still quite difficult. There's a couple of kind of community projects to solve that. And then also things around the build system, kind of caching packages and building multiple projects with the same packages. It's probably fine for most iOS projects if you have one or two packages. If you're building like a Mac OS command line app or a Swift package where you have 30, 40, 50 dependencies, it can take a long time to download and start with. So there's some interesting pictures on the forums for how to solve that. And there's also the new LL Build 2 work that's going on that should fix some of those as well. So the future is definitely bright.
Okay. Has anyone else tested the scan recently?
Yeah, with WeTransfer, we have quite a few open source projects, and some were UI related. And this the opportunity right now is there to support Swift packages with support for resources. And it's great to see those frameworks like Firebase already jumping on it. I think I saw the thread being responded already by Firebase that they are going to support Firebase. And I think that's the least we need. Like, if you can't completely include all dependencies with Swift Package Manager, at least that's how it works for us at WeTransfer. We decide to not use Swift Package Manager because you don't want to use multiple dependency managers. So I think it would be a good for a step forward.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been playing with it, and I finally feel like I can actually use it in projects instead of just doing like sample code to see how it works. Because not having resources, that was a big downside. Like, you really can't. It really had no practical uses for my things without being able to include resources. So, yeah, it's a big difference.
Okay, and there's one last tool you wanted to talk about, Tim, the possibility to run Swift on AWS Lambda. Can you tell us?
Yes, so I touched on this earlier, but yeah, so for those who don't know, AWS Lambda is like it's kind of like a cloud function provider service. So essentially you say, when this route gets called, just run this little bit of Swift code. So it's really useful for writing kind of small API functions. So you can have an API that gets the current weather in the location. So rather than having to spin up an entire server or anything like that, you can just write a little small Lambda function to do that for you. And so it's kind of really cool to see that coming from DubDub as well, and like an official video, officially Apple supported solution for that as well. There's some comments already about IBM as well, and they're very different use cases. So if you're writing a Swift server in Katura or Vapor, you're kind of writing the whole thing, all the APIs and everything, whereas Lambda is kind of very much individual, smaller functions. Personally, myself, I don't really like Lambda. I think the whole serverless space has got a lot of issues to solve. As how do you test it, how do you emulate it, but lots of people use them, and it's good to see another use case for Swift outside of the Apple ecosystem.
Can I ask about the other end of things?
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of the things that I think Apple hasn't really stressed is the HomeKit side of things. And now that we're going to ARM and Apple Silicon, it seems like Swift running on all these things, Swift running on Linux, we might get more support for doing more with HomeKit type of devices. Any thoughts on that?
So about 6 months ago, maybe, or maybe it was like 12 months ago, because who knows how long the last few months have been. They released the source code for HomeKit and also a way of building HomeKit applications and HomeKit modules, I think. So there was a release for that, and you can build whatever you want in HomeKit if it's supported. Obviously, if you want to release it, you have to go through the licensing program. But if you're like a hobbyist with a Raspberry Pi who wants to build their own watering system for their tomato plants, it's possible to do that in Swift and integrate it properly. So I think there might have been a video on this year because there were so many videos, it's quite easy to miss them. But I didn't see any specific videos for building your own HomeKit platforms. But I think as kind of everything converges around Swift, and we could see more of that come through maybe.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions from the attendees. Before moving on to the Q&A session of this event, I would like to have a final word from each of you about if you want to talk about one thing we didn't talk in particular, or something that you like or didn't like during this first fully online WWDC.
I know it happens every year, but I'm just silly excited again. I just get re-enthused and so many things I want to do and try and talk to people about that I just love it right now. I'm very excited.
Great, thank you.
I was almost empty with ideas for writing new articles. And right now it's so many ideas that I'm kind of like blown away.
Having so there are around, I think, 200 session videos. My brain is so full. Like, I'm trying to just kind of have everything just like stuffed in there and keep it, but I'm sure bits are falling out. It was really a lot this year to take in, but all like really good stuff and everything. I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but the beta so far on iOS has been pretty solid. Like, I normally at this time have a laundry list of things that need to be improved. I have a list of things, but it's not like a long laundry list this time. So I'm really excited for the future and what this beta season is going to be, because for beta 1, it's pretty good.
Last year, Apple explicitly told us not to put iOS on our devices, and because of your tweets, I put it on my watch, my phone, my iPad. I'm very happy with it.
I got to be careful with my tweets.
well, I did it one at a time, and I've had a couple issues. I had an iPad that was unresponsive, and I had to force reboot it. But you know, I'm in my house, so it doesn't matter. I'm not going to be out somewhere stuck without a phone. I don't know if I would do this in another year, but if I'm not leaving the house, I feel safe. This feels great.
Well, Daniel, I've heard that EASE is really stress testing iOS versions with more than 900 apps. So I think it's pretty solid.
It's pretty good.
I think for me, this year seems to be kind of a big inflection point for Swift. So I think last year was kind of the first year where we had API stability, and Apple engineers could actually start using Swift in macOS and iOS and their own apps. And I think we're kind of really starting to see the fruits of it. Things like whether it's using Swift UI for Control Center, or whether it's actually making autocomplete in Xcode as good as it was with Objective-C. It's kind of really starting to, everything coming together. It's obviously been a very long game plan for them to kind of put all these things in place for them to actually switch languages. And I think things are starting to pay off now, which is really cool to see.
Great. So before moving on to the Q&A, I forgot just to introduce myself. I'm Greg. I've been an iOS developer for 10 years, and I now run a company that takes care of iOS developers. So by organizing those kind of meetups we are right now, I'm doing also some recruitment here in Paris, and I recently started organizing trainings. And the next one is happening at the end of September. It's a 2-day training on Swift UI, and will obviously be with everything that was announced last week. And the trainer is not me, I'm the organizer. The trainer is Johnson Dale. So there is only 10 places. I think there is like 3 or 4 places left. So if you're interested, I will put you the link in the general chat. And that's it for my auto promotion moment. So we can now move on to the questions. We have lots of questions. So as I said before, there is all the questions you've asked in the Q&A section. I've seen also lots of questions in the general chat. So don't forget, if you still have those questions, to ask them in the Q&A panel. And you can also ask the question live, which is pretty funny. And to do that, it's pretty simple. You just have to raise your hand. So there is a little button on the bottom of your screen that allows you to raise your hand, so you can join us on stage and ask questions directly to our panel. So don't be shy, come on. And while we are waiting for our first attendee to ask a question, I will take some questions that were asked before the event. So first one is by Anonymous. So what is the next feature or project you will be working on that will include something new from iOS 14?
Yeah, I can answer that question. Something we didn't really discuss, and which might not be to all your interest, is the App Store Connect API. There has been more than 200 new API endpoints this year, which is really a lot. And one of them includes performance metrics, which I think is really interesting. So the organizer page of Xcode includes crashes, all kinds of statistics about your app, and you'll be able to get those from an API. It opens up a lot of ideas if you're interested in building your own apps, a Mac app or iOS apps with statistics, or I don't know. For me, at least, it brings a lot of ideas for building my own apps. And I think, yeah, I might jump on that boat and see what I can do and build with that.
Nice. Anyone else is willing to try iOS 14's new stuff?
I'm basically rewriting everything, but one of the things I'm the most excited about is the advances in Pencil Kit. It's so incredibly cool. If you haven't played with an iPad and a pencil, absolutely do it. It's just really amazing, kind of what they've done with the machine learning as far as shape recognition and handwriting recognition. It's really just like shockingly cool.
Handwriting, which is pretty impressive because I can't.
It's that's the thing. I can't read my own writing, but it's doing a fantastic job. So that's really impressive. And also shape recognition. Lots of people have done shape recognition algorithms. This is by far the best one that I've used, both with speed and with accuracy. So it can do shapes like I can do like a pentagon, and it recognizes it without trying to turn it into a circle or some other weird or skewed shape or whatnot. Doing arrows and such, it's really, really, really cool and really fast.
Okay, thank you. Still no one raising his hand or her hand to come on stage with us and ask a question live. Let me see. No hands yet.
We haven't been social for a few months, right? So you kind of get used to sitting behind your screen now.
Yeah, it's still virtual things. We don't are really near each other, which means that we cannot share beers and things like that, sadly. So no pizzas as well. Sorry about that. So next question from Jean-Charles, who I know could have been on stage. Not sure if the labs this year were efficient. I've heard it was hard to have an appointment. Did someone have some feedback with remote labs?
Anyone go to a lab?
Well, I've at least, I didn't get a lab, my colleagues did. And I saw on Twitter quite some people saying like, hey, I subscribed for 3 labs and I got them all, while others were asking on Twitter, hey, I didn't get my SwiftUI lab. Does anyone get a lab so I can ask my questions with yours as well? I have mixed feelings. On one hand, I would say like labs are now open for everyone with a remote edition, which is a really good thing, I think, because it opens up an opportunity for lots. On the other hand, if not everybody gets a lab, that's kind of sad. What I do know is that labs were really good prepared from the Apple side of things. So beforehand, you need to bring your question and share even a project. And when the lab would start, you would get your questions right away. I even heard an example where the Apple engineer watched a few sessions to get himself up to speed with the right answer. I think if you take that into account with our in-person WWDC, the labs were way more prepared and with that a lot more efficient.
So here is Jean-Charles who was asking the
Yes,
question.
I'm asking this question because when we are in a direct lab or at the WWDC, it's pretty easier to see all the engineers in the room and go next to them if there is some slot available, or make more chance to have an appointment. And it was very hard to click on the button here on the WWDC application, so that's why it's pretty difficult this year to have an appointment. Okay.
Maybe it's also a bit young and they don't really know how to handle it as well.
You know, I think one thing that did improve over an in-person WWDC is that we don't have those really big lines for a UI session. I've been to several WWDCs and the line was always like really big and you had to wait for an hour having your MacBook in your hand still doing things because you don't want to wait. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and something what is missing is exchange and networking with developers just next to you on the session. Is something that we're missing. We have the habit to exchange with developers just on the next shares and testing something, and we can also learn for them and with each other, which is something that we only have online this year. So it's something also that is missing.
Jean-Charles, as long as you are here, do you want to ask also your second question about the IDFA?
I just started the question with a funny one about the IDFA opt-in announcement for our marketing team. So yes, joking aside, it was a very big announcement, like when the UID was dropped also by Apple a few years ago. And what the question was about, what do you think about this type of app launching with a lot of permission pop-ups or contextual UIs, which breaks the experience about the app launch for our users? There is more and more context to display to our users that it's very hard to have a great first experience for them.
I think personally, I think it's a good thing. I definitely see like there's a risk of teaching people to just click okay to kind of get through it. And I think there's also a nuanced way for apps to improve their onboarding so that you only ask permission for microphone when you actually need access to the microphone, rather than you open the app for the first time and the first thing it says, I need access to your microphone, your photos, your calendar. And it's like, whoa, why? But I also think things like the pasteboard extension that came out in iOS 14, that's kind of really good way of shaming bad apps into not doing dodgy things. So I think that's a great idea, personally.
I've seen all the reports of all that TikTok was stealing from people. It's been kind of striking to see these things that people are doing.
Yeah, and I think if you're honest with your app, there's several techniques, as you described a bit already, Tim, to really get approval of certain permissions. I mean, if your app is going to add photos from your camera and you need camera permission, don't just show the pop-up, but first explain like, hey, you're about to add a so we need access to it. Make sure to say okay after the next alert shows up. I think that's a common technique which already improves the whole flow and should help most users to get a sense of why we ask those or why iOS is asking those permissions.
For sure. I just want to mention using those is really cool too. So both with location, being able to select the proximity instead of the exact location is awesome, as well as the photo picker. Now even like sharing photos and whatnot to Twitter, you don't have to give access to your entire photo library. You just select the photo that you want to share, and then that's it, which is really nice.
Thank you, guys.
You know, that's the only one thing that broke our app on iOS 14, the way that permission is handled.
Permissions, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. So we have another question from an attendee. Let me bring him on stage. A couple of clicks here and there, and he should be here any second.
It's always that takes away the the struggle. Yeah.
I really like that you can bring the questioner on stage like that. That's cool.
That's really good. That's I love it. René?
Hi guys.
So what
I want to ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm fine. I'm still looking for a job, by the way. Ever since we met at .swift.
Ah. And do you have
Yes, a question about app clips.
Okay.
What's each of your guys' take on this technology? Do you see any implementations that you're looking forward to implementing, or how other businesses will incorporate them? Maybe a little bit about your thoughts on the future of app clips.
I don't know in general, but for someone who's nearby and I can show them an app that it's so hard to find things on the App Store these days that anything else that gets us a chance to expose is a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to get to. I mean, once people are in your app, you have a lot of more opportunities to really stick the user in your app and grab him and make sure the churn is not going down. With app clips, I think we get another opportunity to really show users they should install your app. But yeah, we still have to see whether it's going to be adopted and whether users get used to it, and whether users are even going to install that coffee application to get points to get a free coffee the next time. I don't know. It's something new for us developers, but it's also new for users. So I'm really curious to see how that will go.
I have a bad memory about something else Apple came out with a couple of years ago that was also kind of a small thing you were supposed to put here and there. It was called iBeacon, and
beacons.
Yeah, still don't really know if it works or not.
It's a real opportunity, but I like iBeacons. I don't know if people will accept it. For example, most stores, instead of having the stores app, because who really wants like the Home Depot app on their phone, you can just have like the clip for the one thing you need, or like Starbucks, right? Yeah, to have an entire app on your phone for Starbucks, really, for the most part, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because you're going to do like this really like small transaction. Are the classic one like the parking meter apps, you really don't really need to have that app. I think for certain like segments of business, it makes a lot of sense. And something I hadn't thought about was really the URL experience versus just like the physical QR code or NFC. Because you can share them via URL, it makes it, like Daniel was mentioning, it really improves the discoverability of certain things. So I think that it really kind of depends on how folks adopt it. I hope that there is more adoption, but there's been prior things that were cool that just were not adopted. It really depends on kind of how the community as a whole adopts it. You can't have like one or two apps. We need to have like dozens, if not more, folks just kind of adopting it and doing cool stuff with it. For example, the Apple Store app, the Apple Retail Store app, is one of the coolest apps because it's contextual. It has a different interface if you're at home than if you're inside of an Apple Store. And if you have like a Genius Bar, you walk in the Apple Store, it'll give you like a photo of the person to meet you. Now there's not really lines anymore to help you like identify kind of the person you're going to meet with. That's really, really cool. But basically no one else does that. So and they're doing that with like iBeacons a little bit too, I believe. So it really depends on how people decide to adopt.
And imagine if we ever open this up and have conferences again where the speakers can have their apps discoverable by the attendees and the sponsors can do the same. There are applications, but as you say, iBeacons was in theory a cool idea, but a lot of things about it weren't good enough for people to adopt.
Is it good for you, Niv? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. You can still raise your hand on stage and ask your question directly. Oh, there is Mathilde here. Yes. Let me click on those buttons and you will be with us in no time. I like the idea of the app clip for sponsors.
Hi, everyone. Just got a question. First, how are you during this very bizarre time?
Fine.
Wow. Good.
My question is, do you think this year SwiftUI will be like production ready? Like if you start a new thing for production, would you start it with SwiftUI or UI kits for iOS?
I personally would start all things. If you're starting a brand new app, I would start with SwiftUI because the future is clearly SwiftUI, and you don't want to go back to your root to like uproot that. So if you're starting a new thing, I would start with SwiftUI. Depending on your project, some projects you can actually fully build and ship and be fine SwiftUI. It really depends the specifics of what you want to do, but there's actually a ton you can do pure 100% SwiftUI and ship and be fine.
Yeah, if it's just like a tiny thing that you don't have the equivalent in SwiftUI, you would just still go to SwiftUI and then bring that thing from UI kits.
I would. The other thing I think that's worth mentioning is...
gave a great talk on this that you can find online.
Thanks. The other thing I would mention about it is because a lot of the brand new stuff requires iOS 14, and we have to think about, well, how many folks will that exclude? One of the beauties of iOS 14 is that it didn't drop any device support. So anyone who could run iOS 13 can also run iOS 14. We also have the widgets coming, which is going to be a huge feature for user-facing. You can search emoji. That's huge. Picture-in-picture. And all new emojis. Have the capsicum emoji coming in fall. So I think there's going to be a lot of draw for users to adopt it. So I would just start with SwiftUI and keep trucking.
And if you target iOS 14, you're going to get the Mac for free too.
That is a good point. That is a good point.
Yeah.
I think there is another thing to consider is if you start a new project with SwiftUI and you have a team with only UIKit knowledge and you have a tight deadline, you might want to go with your knowledge and use UIKit instead, because that speeds you up maybe a bit faster because you don't have the learning curve of SwiftUI. Although I still doubt it's so simple. I'm not too experienced with it, to be honest, but it would be something to consider, at least if I would make that decision.
I would say the time save, there is a learning curve because SwiftUI is a different thing, but the time saved in actually implementing SwiftUI is so gigantic compared to UIKit. It saves you like so much time that you actually have time to implement the learning curve and then like watch a show. It's dramatic.
It's a very interesting
The other thing I'd add to that is, as I mentioned before, the way you architect a SwiftUI app is so different that if you start it with UIKit and try to move over, there's a lot of different thinking involved and the data flow and everything. So it's not trivial.
Okay. Well, cheers, everyone.
Thank you, Mathilde, for your question. See you.
Yeah.
We have another question. We have lots of other questions, in fact. So let's bring Nick on stage.
Hey guys, I just have a question about the home screen widgets. So if you recall, watchOS had the glances, and I don't know how many people found them to be useful. So do you think that the home screen widgets on iOS are going to suffer the same fate of eventually just disappearing, or do you think they're going to be more useful and maybe become user interactive over time?
I don't know. What feels different is I'm experimenting. I'm going all in, and so I've got a home screen and I've got the app library. And at the top of my home screen, I've put the smart widget. And so I don't know about on Mac OS, but on iOS, it has changed my interaction with the phone already. I already, mainly when I want to find something, drag down and do a search and find things. But my navigation has changed. And for the apps that I don't find on my fourth screen, I wasn't finding them anyway.
So I want to comment first. Awesome shirt. The complimentary shirt.
Yes.
So I agree with everything that Daniel said. I think that there is a gigantic difference in that the home screen is like the most prime real estate that you could have in the Apple ecosystem. As they mentioned during the sessions, people go to the home screen 90 times a day. Glances were a little bit more hidden. So the home screen is just like front and center, here it is. And also that smart widget that shows the apps is pretty incredible. So I have over 900 apps on my phone. More apps than there were pages to fill. And I got rid of every single page except for, like Daniel, that one screen on the front that's full of widgets. It's 100% widgets. And then the next screen, which is the app library. And I basically just use that smart widget for the top 8 apps. And it's really good prediction. And honestly, you don't have to be that good to pick my top 8, right? And then I have 4 on the dock. And then if I need anything else, it's Spotlight. So I think widgets are going to be absolutely huge for folks. Because they give you like such insight into the information. It's kind of based on the same concept that the glances were, but because it's on the home screen of the phone, that's just like prime real estate. So because of that, I think it's going to get greater adoption.
It's also one of the biggest change we've had since almost the beginning of the iPhone, in fact, because with the time we've had more rows of applications, more columns, but this is very visual change. And yeah,
right. I'm sorry, did you say Windows Mobile?
And there's some things that I can see now that I couldn't see before that were a pain. For example, knowing how charged my AirPods are. Now there's a widget, I just look at my phone and I see the charge of my AirPods versus before I had to swipe down from Control Center, then hold down on the thing and then make sure I have the battery widget installed, and it was way too much work. Now I can just actually glance. This is like great glances, so I can like look at it and see. And the fact that you can have widgets of different sizes and varying content and such, I think they're going to be very, very, very popular.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nick.
Cool.
So
thank you.
We'll take one last question from our attendees. Sorry, because I cannot read your name, but I'm bringing you on stage.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thanks for this meetup. Yes, my name is Evgeny. You couldn't read.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is, you've already mentioned it, but the thing I was most thrilled about is collaboration between Apple, Google, Amazon, I think, and more other companies. What do you think about it? Do you think that we will see much more devices with HomeKit in future, in meantime?
Yeah, so I think like over the last few years, HomeKit has slowly been opening up a little bit. So back in the early days when it was first released, you had to have a special hardware encryption chip in your HomeKit device, which means you had to be part of the MiFi program, which means there was a kind of huge barrier to entry if you want to be a HomeKit device. That was relaxed 1 or 2 years ago, whereas it could be done in software. And now they're kind of starting to see this kind of integration of different providers and ecosystems. So I think it can only be a good thing, right? Like there's not a downside to collaborating with other smart home device companies and smart home device ecosystems. And I hope it will mean there are more things that you can do with HomeKit in the future, and there are more products. If you look at things like Alexa's got thousands and thousands of products that work with Alexa. Most of them might not be any good, but there are lots of things you can do. So I'm hoping it means that any kind of weird, obscure things you have, like a automatic outside tap or blinds or windows, can all get added in now and easily. And there'll be more of a incentive for manufacturers to add HomeKit support because it's already there if they support Google Home or Alexa.
The only thing I would say there is Apple spent a lot of time in the keynote taking shots at Google, not by name, but they kept mentioning privacy and on device. And so I think that will be a differentiator in how they interact with the HomeKit stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So there'll be some defined kind of APIs or protocols that devices can communicate. But I think that Apple will always have their clear focus on privacy and ensure that, you know, if you're building a HomeKit camera, it's not just being streamed up to the internet. And I think that's important as well, because personally, especially, and I'm sure there's plenty of other people who buy into the HomeKit ecosystem because of some of the privacy aspects, rather than having like an always-on Alexa.
Okay, thank you for your question. So there is still like thousands of questions, and I think we didn't cover, obviously, half of what was announced last week, as it was pretty packed and lots of interesting to talk about. We will stop here for the Q&A session, so we still have time to go to the networking mode, and so people can chat together and chat with you as well. We still have 45 minutes for the networking session, and then after that, for the hardcore people who want to talk or have beers and so on, I will post the link another event, so we can log on to this one after that, because we are there is a 2.5 hour time frame that we cannot exceed. Yeah. So thanks a lot to all of you for being here on this panel tonight. It was really interesting and cool to talk with you about all those new things that will appear and arrive in our daily lives in the coming weeks and months. So can't wait to see that in motion. You are staying with us for the networking part as well. If you can go on different tables, because I think lots of people would like to ask you a question and talk with you, even though they are a bit shy to come on stage with us, because I know it can be a bit frightening at some point. If you stay here, don't be afraid to open up your mic during the networking thing, or your cam, so you can talk with all the other attendees and our great panelists, because that's fun, to be honest. So thank you very much. I have a last word for you, panelists, and also for the attendees. That's a nice message to conclude. So thank you so much, and see you around those virtual tables.